I do not remember the exact moment my body buckled, only the sensation of the floor tilting beneath me and the echo of metal crashing somewhere behind my head before everything dissolved into a blur of white light and fractured voices. When awareness returned, I was already being pushed through the sliding doors of the ER, the sharp smell of antiseptic stinging my nose and oxygen mask pressing tightly over my mouth and chin. My chest felt heavy, as if someone had placed a stack of bricks on top of me, and the monitor beside my stretcher screamed in frantic beeps that matched the chaos inside my body. Nurses hovered around me, their movements precise, their voices clipped as they called out numbers I could barely register. One said my heart rate was climbing past 170, another asked for a second IV line, and a third leaned close to my ear, repeating my name, trying to anchor me to reality. I wanted to answer, but the words stuck in my throat like gravel. I felt the cuff tightening around my arm, cold electrodes pressing against my skin, gloved hands checking my pulse, and the rhythmic squeak of wheels beneath me as they rushed me deeper into the emergency ward. Someone asked, "Who are her emergency contacts?" and another replied, "Parents listed as Henry and Carol Mitchell." Even in my dazed state, dread crawled across my spine. I wanted to say, "Do not bother, they will not pick up," but my lips barely moved. Still they tried. I heard the faint ring through the speaker before the call abruptly cut off. Call declined. They tried again. Declined. A nurse frowned in confusion, then tried a third time only to get the same cold rejection. The word declined echoed in my head louder than the monitor alarms. A part of me was unsurprised, but hearing the proof in real time in a moment when I was barely clinging to consciousness pierced deeper than any cardiac spike or needle ever could. The doctor leaned over me and said, "Lauren, stay with us. You collapsed at work. You are safe here." But the reassurance slid right off me. Safe did not feel like the right word when your own parents refused to answer a call that might have been the difference between life and death. The world swayed again, and darkness swept over me like a curtain dropping. I woke what felt like hours later in a quieter corner of the ER, separated by a thin curtain that did little to muffle the distant sounds of footsteps and intercom announcements. The lights were dimmer here, softer, but my body still felt like it had been hollowed out and filled with cement. A nurse checked my vitals with gentle efficiency and said, "You gave us a scare. Your heart rate spiked dangerously. We tried calling your parents several times. 2 calls were declined. The rest went to voicemail." I nodded even though my throat tightened. Disappointment did not even shock me anymore. It was more like a familiar bruise someone kept pressing. The nurse hesitated as if bracing for my reaction, then added, "We left detailed messages. Hopefully they reach out soon." The hope in her voice felt misplaced. They were not coming. They never did. When she stepped away, the silence grew heavier. I stared at the ceiling, trying to piece together the hours leading up to the collapse, but everything blurred into a smear of exhaustion and fluorescent light. After a while, a different nurse returned holding my phone. "It was drained when you came in, so we charged it," she said softly. She placed it in my hand, and I instantly regretted asking for it. I knew I should rest, breathe focus on staying alive. But the fear of being alone, of being forgotten, rose in my chest and overpowered every rational thought. My fingers trembled as I unlocked the screen. A notification appeared at the top. "You were mentioned in a post by Maddie Glow official, my sister." Against my better judgment, I tapped it open. The picture loaded slowly as if mocking me. My family sat at a sunny outdoor table, plates of avocado toast and overpriced cocktails spread out like a magazine ad. Henry raising his mimosa. Carol smiling in her pastel sweater. Noah leaning back in his seat with that effortless smirk he reserved for days when someone else was paying. And Maddie in full influencer mode, angled perfectly toward the camera. Her makeup flawless, her expression soft and curated as always. The caption sat beneath the photo in bold letters. "Family brunch, no negativity today." My vision blurred for a moment. Not because of the medication, because of the irony. Because while I lay here gasping for air with machines keeping my heart from spiraling out of control, they were laughing over brunch, celebrating a drama-free day. I zoomed in as if hoping to find an ounce of guilt in their faces. Nothing. Not one seat left empty for me. not one expression that hinted they noticed my absence. I scrolled further and felt another blow as sharp as the collapse itself. You were removed from Mitchell family chat. Removed. Deleted. Cut out while I was lying in the ER, barely alive. I stared at the screen until my reflection appeared over the photo, my face pale, my eyes hollow, the oxygen mask imprint still faint on my cheeks. A nurse walking by asked if I needed anything. I swallowed my voice, barely a whisper. No, I think I have had enough. In that moment, something inside me shifted. Not a clean break, but the beginning of one. A crack spreading slowly through years of buried hurt and loyalty. And as the monitor beside me returned to its steady rhythm, I realized something I had spent my entire adult life avoiding. My family had not just forgotten me today. They had never truly seen me at all. Before the collapse forced everything into the open, my life had already been unraveling in slow, quiet ways that no one ever noticed because I was too good at hiding the damage. My days began at 5 in the morning with the shrill alarm slicing through the Seattle fog, and before the sun even touched the skyline, I was already lacing up steel-toed boots and heading to the steel plant where I worked as a safety engineer. It was the kind of place where the air always smelled faintly of burnt metal and hot dust, where the walls trembled every time a furnace door opened, and where every shift felt like threading a needle between danger and exhaustion. My job was to make sure nothing and no one caught fire or exploded, which meant I was constantly on my feet, constantly vigilant, constantly holding my breath each time a new trainee ignored a warning sign or a supervisor cut corners to speed up production. 12-hour shifts were normal. 14-hour shifts were common. Sometimes 16-hour shifts happened without warning, and the only thing keeping me upright was caffeine and the stubborn belief that if I pushed hard enough, the next day might be easier. But the next day never was. And no matter how many hours I worked, no matter how many safety reports I filed or fires I prevented, the weight I carried outside the plant was always heavier. The truth was that my job was the easiest part of my life. The real exhaustion came from being the designated problem solver for an entire family that seemed determined to sink while insisting I keep them afloat. My parents, Henry and Carol, had not held steady jobs in over a decade. Henry liked to say he was between opportunities, but those opportunities had been missing for 15 years, and Carol claimed her anxiety kept her from working anywhere that required more than 4 hours of focus. Their bills, however, showed up like clockwork, and somewhere along the line, I became the person responsible for keeping their lights on their mortgage paid and their refrigerator filled. They never called it financial support. They called it gratitude, as if I owed them repayment for raising me, as if motherhood and fatherhood were invoices mailed 20 years later. Their favorite line echoed in my head constantly. We raised you. Now you support us. My sister Maddie was a different kind of burden. She was the kind of influencer who built an entire personality around positivity and wellness while living off money she guilted from other people. She ran 3 different online brands, all of which existed more in her imagination than in profit margins. Meditation candles, affirmation journals, holistic skincare routines she never actually used. Whenever one of her projects failed, she blamed the algorithm, not her lack of effort. She always had a way of calling me only when she needed something. Can you help me cover the payment for my studio this month? Can you sponsor my retreat in Malibu? Can you front me just this once? Just this once had become the soundtrack of my life. And then there was Noah, my younger brother, who operated under the belief that responsibility was a suggestion, not a requirement. He floated from job to job, losing each one for reasons that were always someone else's fault. My landlord discriminated against me. My boss was threatened by me. My coworkers hated how hardworking I was. Yet somehow this hardworking man always needed me to cover his rent, his phone bill, his transportation, his streaming subscriptions, even his grocery money. When I tried to set boundaries, he played the victim with such talent that even I sometimes believed him. You make more than us. You are the strong one. You know we would help you if we could. Except they never could, and they never did. And every month, as my bank account drained a little more, I told myself it was temporary, that families helped each other, that I was doing the right thing. But the truth was simpler and much uglier. I was terrified of what would happen if I stopped. I feared the guilt, the accusations, the silence, the disappointment. My parents had spent years training me to believe that love required constant sacrifice and that setting boundaries was betrayal. So I worked, and worked, and worked. I ignored the chest tightness that had been creeping in for months. I brushed off the dizziness that lasted a little too long. I dismissed the headaches that throbbed behind my eyes like warning lights I refused to read. I told myself that every family had issues. Every parent leaned on their children sometimes. Every sibling asked for help. The difference was that in my family, the leaning was always in one direction. On my rare days off, I tried to rest, but rest felt like a luxury I needed to earn, and I never earned it. If I did not answer Maddie's messages instantly, she accused me of being unsupportive. If I did not send money the same day my parents asked, they reminded me how hard their lives were and how I could fix everything if I just cared enough. And if I ever dared to hint that I was struggling, Noah laughed and said, "You, struggling. Come on, Lauren. You have everything. Everything." That word still stung. If only they knew how empty everything felt. Work became my refuge, not because it was easy, but because it was the only place where I knew exactly what was expected of me. Danger made sense. Heat made sense. The rules of safety were clear. The rules of family were a maze of shifting guilt and emotional landmines. Eventually, I stopped noticing the difference between tired and dangerously tired. My body tried to warn me, but I brushed it off like I brushed off everything else. Until the day it all gave out at once. And even then, part of me feared the reaction my collapse would provoke. Not fear for my health, fear of the accusations. Fear of being told I was irresponsible, dramatic, selfish for needing help. In hindsight, it is almost unbelievable how normal the burden felt. But that was the life I lived before the ER. A life built entirely from endurance denial and the silent hope that one day my family would finally see me. They never did, and the collapse was the price I paid for believing they eventually would. The moment that finally cracked something inside me did not happen in the ER or at the steel plant, or during one of the nights I lay awake wondering how long my body could keep going. It happened at a family gathering 2 weeks before the collapse on a warm Sunday afternoon when the sky was painfully blue and my parents had decided to host a backyard lunch to celebrate Maddie reaching 10,000 followers on her wellness page. She called it a milestone. I called it another excuse for the family to orbit around her like she was the sun and we were disposable satellites. I arrived early as usual because my mother had texted me that morning asking if I could pick up artisan bread from the bakery and maybe help set up the table since her back was acting up again. By the time I carried the bread into the yard, Maddie was already striking poses near the rose bushes, turning her head left and right to catch the light that filtered through the leaves. She glanced at me, wrinkled her nose, and said, "You look exhausted, Lauren. Try to smile today. Okay?" It felt less like a suggestion and more like a command issued by someone who believed she was entitled to dictate how others existed around her. I forced a polite smile and carried the bread to the outdoor table where my father was fiddling with the Bluetooth speaker, cursing under his breath because it refused to connect. When he saw me, he gave a quick nod, the kind reserved for casual acquaintances, not daughters. Carol emerged from the kitchen in a pastel blouse and immediately began adjusting Maddie's hair like a stage mom preparing her star before opening night. At one point, she looked over her shoulder at me and said, "Lauren, honey, try not to stand directly behind Maddie in any photos. Your tired face throws off the aesthetic." I swallowed the sting as always because decades of conditioning had taught me that speaking up would only make things worse. Maddie snapped her fingers twice. "Lauren, can you grab my ring light from the car? I left it in the trunk." Without thinking, I obeyed because obedience had become muscle memory. I retrieved the light, carried it across the lawn, set it up, and stepped aside while Maddie beamed as if she had just achieved something monumental. She posed. She pouted. She asked Noah to film her quick gratitude video, but Noah refused, claiming he did not like the angle. "Lauren can do it. She always does everything." His tone was casual, dismissive, almost amused. Maddie handed me her phone without even looking at me. "Can you record a few takes for me? I need something aesthetic but authentic." I wanted to laugh at the contradiction, but instead I held the camera steady while she spoke into the lens about gratitude and family and being surrounded by people who uplift her. Every word grated against my skin, each syllable a reminder of how invisible I was in my own family's narrative. When she finished, she peered at the footage and frowned. "Lauren, did you not get a single flattering angle? You always manage to make things look flat." "Try again." Before I could respond, my father walked over with a plate of grilled vegetables and said loudly, "Maybe if Lauren smiled more, she would not ruin the energy." "Look at her standing there like she is at a funeral." Maddie giggled. Noah snorted. Carol sighed dramatically and added, "Honestly, honey, we are trying to celebrate something positive today. Do not bring your work stress here. Your face looks tense." Very tense. I felt something hot rise in my throat. Shame mixing with disbelief. I had woken early, done errands for them, helped set up, filmed their videos, and still somehow I was the one ruining the mood. I tried to step away, but Maddie grabbed my wrist, pulled me closer to the table, and shoved her phone into my hand again. "Can you take a group picture of us? You can stand over there in the shade, preferably not too close. Your tired vibe kind of disrupts the aesthetic." I stepped back, lifting the phone, watching the three of them arrange themselves around the table. Henry puffed out his chest. Carol smoothed her blouse. Noah flipped his hair. Maddie leaned forward with her practiced smile, the picture of effortless beauty, while her hand subtly motioned for me to take the photo quickly. As I looked at them through the phone screen, something inside me twisted in a way that felt physical, like a knot tightening in my stomach. They looked like a perfect family. They looked complete. The only thing missing was me. And that was the point. After I snapped the picture, Maddie took the phone, zoomed in, edited her face, adjusted the lighting, cropped the photo so that the corner where I had been standing was completely removed, and posted it instantly with the caption, "Surrounded by love and positive energy." It was surreal watching her shape a reality that excluded me entirely, even though I was standing right there holding the ring light she needed to make her face glow. I stepped toward the table to sit down, but Carol blocked the seat with her purse and said, "Oh, no, honey, this is for family. You can sit at the small table near the porch. Less crowd there." Her voice was soft, but the message was sharp enough to cut. Maddie glanced at me and smirked. "It will be better for the photos, you understand." And I did understand. I understood more clearly than I ever had before. I was not part of the celebration. I was the help, the extra, the shadow. The accessory they used when convenient and dismissed when it did not fit the picture they wanted to display. I sat at the small table alone, picking at the food I had helped prepare, listening to them laugh loudly about jokes that would never be directed at me. And somewhere in that hour, something in my chest cracked a stress fracture forming long before the collapse at the steel plant. It was the humiliation, not the exhaustion, that first pushed my body toward breaking, even if I did not recognize it at the time. They erased me while I was standing right in front of them, and I let them. That day became the bruise that never healed the quiet injury that would bleed into everything that followed. The day everything finally collapsed was one of those gray Seattle mornings where the sky feels heavy enough to crush you before you even step outside. I remember waking up with a pressure in my chest that made breathing feel like dragging air through wet cement, but I still pulled on my steel-toed boots, shoved my hair into a tight bun, and told myself I could push through one more shift. I had been doing that for months, maybe years, convincing myself that the ache behind my ribs was stress, not danger, that the dizziness on stairwells was dehydration, not a warning that the constant hum in my ears was nothing more than fatigue. Denial had become its own kind of oxygen. When I arrived at the steel plant, the heat from the furnaces hit me like a wall. The air shimmered above the molten metal pits, filling the entire facility with a constant background roar that vibrated in my teeth. My job that morning was to oversee a new set of trainees running diagnostics on the north furnace's cooling valves. It was delicate work, the kind that required precise attention and steady nerves, but my hands already felt slightly numb as I clipped my ID badge to my shirt. I ignored it. I always ignored it. Midway through the shift, one of the trainees bypassed a safety lock without tagging it, and a plume of steam hissed from the pipe, startling the whole group. I rushed over my voice hoarse from too many long days and corrected the mistake, explaining for the fourth time the importance of following protocol. As I spoke, my heart beat too hard and too fast, thumping against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I steadied myself on the rail, pretending I was just annoyed, not struggling to breathe. The trainee apologized. I nodded. We moved on. Around hour 10, the temperature inside the plant rose sharply, and my vision shimmered at the edges like heat was distorting everything I looked at. I wiped sweat from my forehead, but the simple motion made my arm tremble. I bent down to check the pressure gauge near the south furnace and felt the world tilt sideways for a split second. When I stood, a hot wave of dizziness followed, and black dots clouded my sight. I blinked hard until the shape settled. No one noticed. No one ever noticed when I struggled. They were too new, too overwhelmed, too unaware of how close danger always lingered. I kept moving. I checked another valve, another gauge, another report. Each step felt heavier, like my boots were filling with concrete. My chest throbbed with a deep electrical ache that radiated down my left arm. Still, I told myself to keep going. My family needed me to work. The plant needed me to work. If I just pushed a little harder, I could make it to the end of the shift. A lie I had relied on far too long. At hour 12, as the furnaces roared and metal clanged on steel, the plant supervisor called me over to inspect a fluctuation in the temperature readings. I walked toward him, clipboard in hand, but halfway across the platform, a sudden, violent pressure gripped my chest so tightly that my breath snapped short. I froze, one hand clutching the railing, the other still holding the clipboard that began to slip from my fingers. The clang of metal striking the floor echoed louder than the furnaces, louder than the machinery, louder than my own thoughts. My knees buckled. The heat felt unbearable, pressing against my lungs, squeezing out every bit of air. Someone shouted my name, but the voice sounded distant, muffled underwater. My heartbeat spiked into a frantic rhythm, pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears like a drum. The platform beneath me swayed, or maybe I swayed, I could not tell. The clipboard hit the floor again, this time louder, and the sound fractured my focus. A trainee rushed toward me, his face warped with panic. "Lauren, are you okay? Do you need help?" I tried to answer. I tried to inhale. Nothing worked. The air would not come. My throat felt sealed shut, my chest locked in place. Another wave of pain rippled through me, sharper than before, and my legs gave out completely. I fell forward onto the cold steel grating, the surface biting into my palms. The training alarms beeped in the background, but they blurred together with the ringing in my ears. I heard someone yell for a supervisor. Someone else yelled for 911. 101. Shapes moved around me in frantic motion, shadows shifting across the overhead lights. The world pulsed in and out of focus. A hand pressed against my shoulder, steadying me as I slipped sideways onto my back. My mouth opened, gasping like a fish pulled from the water. No air, no sound, just a desperate, painful attempt to stay conscious. I felt fingers at my neck checking my pulse. Too fast. Far too fast. Someone tried to reassure me, telling me help was on the way, but even that felt unreal, like it was happening to someone else. The pain radiated down my arm, now sharp and burning. My vision narrowed until only the ceiling remained a distorted mosaic of flickering lights. Then I whispered something I did not mean to speak aloud. "Please do not call my parents. They are busy." The trainee leaning over me frowned, confused and scared. "Lauren, stay awake. Stay awake." But the lights dimmed. The roaring furnaces faded. The cold metal beneath me disappeared into a distant hum. And then everything went black. My collapse was not dramatic or cinematic. It was quiet, silent. A body finally giving out after holding far too much for far too long. And in that darkness, the last thing I remember was not fear. It was relief. Relief that for once I could not carry anything anymore. Not the pressure. Not the expectations. Not the endless demands. Nothing. When consciousness finally returned, it came in fragments, like someone was switching the world on one dim light at a time. At first, I heard only the steady beeping of a monitor, calm and rhythmic, so different from the frantic alarms that had chased me into darkness. Then I felt the stiffness of hospital sheets beneath my fingers, the plastic tug of an IV taped against the crook of my arm, the cold bite of an oxygen cannula resting beneath my nose. My eyelids felt heavy, sticky, as if I had slept through an entire season, and when I forced them open, the room swam into view with a blur of pale curtains and soft, fluorescent glow. A nurse appeared beside me almost instantly, her voice gentle but firm, the kind of tone reserved for patients who had scared the medical staff more than once. "Welcome back, Lauren. You are in the emergency room. You collapsed at work and arrived with severe cardiac instability. You are safe now." Safe. The word echoed strangely, like it belonged to someone else. My throat burned when I tried to speak, and all that came out was a rasped whisper. "What happened?" She checked my vitals before answering. "Your heart rate was dangerously elevated. Extreme exhaustion, severe dehydration, and acute arrhythmia. Your coworker acted incredibly fast. It is why you are still here." Her words should have comforted me, but instead, they felt like a punch to the chest. I had been walking a tightrope for so long that I forgot how close the drop below really was. When she finished taking my blood pressure, she hesitated the way people hesitate when they know something will hurt you but must tell you anyway. "We tried contacting your emergency contacts several times. Your parents. The first 2 calls were manually declined. The others went to voicemail. Declined." That word again. It hit harder than the memory of collapsing on steel grating, harder than the pain still radiating down my arm. I stared at her, trying to process the idea that my parents had intentionally rejected calls from a hospital, calls that might have signaled that their daughter was dying. My voice cracked when I managed to speak. "They declined." Yes. She did not sugarcoat it. She did not offer excuses on their behalf. She simply met my eyes with the kind of sympathetic understanding that said she had seen this before. Families who only pretended to be families. She placed a hand on the rail of my bed. We left detailed messages. Hopefully they will reach out soon, but I already knew they would not. Not because they were busy, not because they did not hear their phone, because concern for me had always been conditional rationed only when convenient. The nurse stepped away to update my chart, and I lay there staring up at the white ceiling tiles, counting them like it might anchor me to something real. I tried to remember the last time my parents had shown genuine care, a birthday years ago, a half-hearted apology once, a hug after I landed my first job. But those memories felt faded, eroded by years of manipulation and emotional debt. Pain spread slowly beneath my ribs, not the medical kind, but the kind that came from realizing just how disposable I was to the people who insisted I owed them everything. I shifted slightly, wincing as the IV pulled at my skin. My chest felt sore, as if someone had pressed their hand there for hours. A security guard appeared at my door, holding a clipboard. "Miss Mitchell, we need your signature for the emergency intake forms." I blinked at the stack of papers he offered me. Even in crisis, the American healthcare system moved with brutal efficiency. At the bottom sheet, I saw the itemized estimate of my ER cost so far. It made my stomach twist. I was alone in every sense of the word. No family, no support. No one coming through the hospital doors to hold my hand or say they were glad I survived. As he left, the nurse returned with my phone. It was fully charged now, the dark screen reflecting my pale, exhausted face. "I should rest," she said softly, but she knew I would not. When she walked away, I stared at the phone for several long seconds, debating whether opening it would help or destroy whatever fragile stability I had left. I unlocked it anyway. The notifications loaded instantly, a flood of messages from work, some from friends, a reminder about an upcoming bill, and one particular alert that made my pulse spike. "You were mentioned in a post by Maddie Glow Official." My sister. My thumb hovered over the screen as a cold weight settled in my stomach. I tapped it open and waited for the image to load. Sunlit patio, trendy brunch plates, a table full of cocktails, my parents wearing bright smiles, Noah laughing with his head thrown back, and Maddie glowing in perfect lighting, her face angled for maximum flattery. The caption read, "Family brunch, no drama today. A punch, a knife, a slow twist. Seeing the photo felt like standing outside my own home watching someone else live my life, someone who mattered more than I ever did, and as if that were not enough, another notification popped up. You were removed from Mitchell family chat, removed while I lay unconscious in a hospital bed, removed like I was an expired prescription, something no longer useful. My vision blurred as I stared at the screen, not from the arrhythmia this time, but from something heavier. A nurse walked by and paused when she saw my expression. "Miss Mitchell, are you okay?" I closed my eyes, took a shaky breath, and whispered, "No." But I will be. And in saying it out loud, something shifted inside me. The ER lights hummed softly above me, and for the first time in my life, I let myself feel the truth without excuses or guilt. I was alone, truly alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly what I needed to finally see what my family had been all along. I should have put the phone down after seeing the brunch photo, but there is a certain kind of pain that makes you keep looking even when you know it will hurt more, like pressing on a bruise to see if it still aches. My thumb hovered over Maddie's profile picture, that perfect headshot lit by a ring light I once helped her buy because she claimed it was essential for her career. I tapped her name and her page opened into a carefully curated gallery of pastel colors, smiling faces, and captions about gratitude and boundaries she never practiced. I scrolled through her recent posts, each one worse than the last, because each one showed a family I no longer recognized smiling in moments I was never invited to. There were selfies with Noah at the marina, inspirational quotes about inner peace, and a photo of Carol hugging a bouquet of flowers with a caption about self-love. It was absurd how peaceful everything looked, how seamlessly they erased the fact that while they were sipping mimosas and posing for photos, I was being rushed into an ER with my heart slamming against my ribs. Then I saw it, the story that made everything inside me freeze. A short clip filmed at the brunch table. Maddie twisting her straw in a pale orange drink, hair cascading perfectly over her shoulder, eyes glowing under soft sunlight. She leaned close to the camera and said, "Spending time with the people who matter most. Family brunch, no drama today." The clip ended with her raising her glass toward the camera and smiling like someone who believed she lived inside a magazine ad. I clicked to the next story and my breath stopped. I was tagged, not in a supportive post, not in a message asking where I was, not in any attempt to check on me. I was tagged as a joke. Maddie had added a graphic arrow pointing to an empty chair at the brunch table with the text, "Wish you were here, but only if you brought good vibes." It was meant to be cute, playful, maybe even funny to her followers. But to me, lying in a hospital bed with wires taped to my chest and an ache spreading beneath my ribs, it felt like someone had reached into my chest and twisted. The sound of my heart monitor quickened, a clear betrayal of the calm expression I tried to maintain. I clicked back to the image staring at the empty chair, imagining myself sitting there while they smiled around me, pretending everything was normal. But in this version, I was not invited. I was the punchline. My hands trembled around the phone, and I could feel heat building behind my eyes, the kind of heat that precedes tears, but I refused to let them fall. Not here, not now. A nurse passing by paused and glanced at the monitor. "Let me know if you feel any pain in your chest," she said gently. I nodded, though the pain she meant was not the pain I was feeling. I closed the story and scrolled again, knowing I should stop, but unable to. And then I saw something that made my stomach clench. A comment from Carol under Maddie's brunch post. "Finally, a peaceful day. No tension. Proud of you, sweetie." Proud of her for what? Existing, posting, being the favorite, being the one who never lifted a finger yet always received praise. Beneath that comment, Henry had left a row of clapping emojis and a note that said, "So happy today turned out perfect." I stared at the word perfect until the letters blurred together. Perfect. While I was fighting to breathe. Perfect. While doctors were trying to stabilize my heart. Perfect. Because I was absent. My pulse spiked again and the monitor beeped loud enough that another nurse glanced over the curtain, checking that I was still conscious. I locked my phone screen and let it fall onto my lap, though the urge to throw it across the room tingled through my fingers. I placed my palm over my chest, trying to steady the frantic rhythm beneath my ribs, but my heart had taken on a life of its own. I closed my eyes, exhaling slowly, remembering the humiliating afternoon in my parents' yard when Maddie posed under the rose bushes and asked me to move because my tired face ruined the vibe. Remembering the night Noah called me hysterical because his landlord threatened eviction and said I was cruel for asking him to contribute anything to the rent I paid entirely. Remembering the countless mornings when Carol texted me reminders about their overdue bills with a tone that implied responsibility was a burden she had never agreed to carry. And now, here in the ER, they had turned my collapse into an inconvenience, an absence that made their brunch more peaceful, a gap at the table they could decorate with jokes instead of concern. I took another breath and opened the phone one more time, despite knowing it would hurt. One new notification sat at the top of the screen. You were removed from Maddie Close Circle, her private list, her inner circle, the place where she shared her most curated, intimate content. She had cut me out completely, as if being tagged in a joke was not enough, as if removing me from the family group chat was not enough, as if declining hospital calls was not enough. A shiver ran through me, the kind that comes not from physical cold, but from emotional clarity. I had known for years that my family depended on me financially. I had known they took advantage of my silence, my stability, my willingness to carry their weight. But I had not known until this moment how little they valued me as a person. I stared at the dark screen again, watching my faint reflection blend into the background. The girl looking back at me looked older than 35, tired, fragile, alone. But beneath that, something new flickered, something sharp. Something alive. A nurse approached again, placing a warm hand on my arm. "How are you feeling, sweetheart? Do you need anything?" I opened my eyes and gave a small, steady breath. No, not anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I saw my family clearly. And the truth, as brutal as it was, opened a door I had never allowed myself to touch. A door that whispered, "You do not have to keep living like this." The ER lights hummed softly above me, and my heart, still fragile and sore, settled into a slower rhythm. I knew nothing would ever be the same again. And maybe that was not a tragedy. Maybe that was the beginning. I learned the shape of kindness that afternoon by the sound of low heels on linoleum and the faint rustle of a wool coat being folded over the back of a chair before I even saw her face. And then there she was, at the foot of my bed. Ruth Carter, my mother's older sister. 68, hair silver, like clean frost eyes that missed nothing, posture, straight as a ledger line, a quiet authority that made every anxious muscle in my body loosen by a fraction. She did not gush or gasp or ask dramatic questions. She simply took in the monitors, the IV, the chart clipped to the end of the bed, then looked at me with a steady focus that said I was not an emergency to be managed, but a person to be protected. "Honey," she said, voice warm and contained, "I got here as soon as I heard." I nodded because words were heavy and my throat still scraped when I used them. "Did Mom call you?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Ruth's mouth tilted not unkind, just honest. "Your plant manager did, Lauren. He said you collapsed on the floor and scared the daylights out of half the crew. He also said the hospital has been trying to reach your parents." The nurse confirmed it. I watched her take this in one quiet breath, one slight narrowing of the eyes, and then the gentlest shift closer, a hand on the rail like an anchor. "We will talk about the rest later. Right now you breathe and let them take care of you." I felt the sting behind my eyes again and swallowed it because I did not want to cry in front of anyone. Not even Ruth, but she already saw everything bright people try to hide. She slipped her coat off and draped it over the chair, revealing a navy cardigan and a crisp white blouse that somehow made the fluorescent room feel less harsh. She asked the nurse calm, specific questions that only a person fluent in forms and facts would think to ask. What were the presenting symptoms? What did the EKG show on arrival? What is the plan for overnight monitoring? Has hydration been corrected? Any electrolyte abnormalities? The nurse answered with the same calm precision, and I watched the two of them map my body into a series of solvable steps that made the panic inside me shrink. Ruth did not flinch when the nurse mentioned arrhythmia or when she noted 2 declined calls to my parents. She simply asked for the times of those calls, had the nurse repeat them, and wrote them down in a small notebook she pulled from her bag. It was the same notebook she had used for decades in her work as a senior accountant with the Internal Revenue Service, a job that trained her to track patterns and gather proof and keep her voice level when other people tried to bluff. When she finished, Ruth turned her attention back to me, and the steel in her gaze softened into velvet. "You scared me," she said quietly, "but I am here now." It was the now that mattered. Not promises about tomorrow, not platitudes about family, just the unshakable presence of someone who had chosen to show up without being asked, without being begged, without bargaining for what she would get in return. She reached for my hand, and her skin was warm, surprisingly soft, the grip firm enough to remind me I was still in this world. "Do you need water? Do you want me to dim the light? Do you want the blanket higher?" Her questions were small and practical and exactly right, and each one chipped a little more of the ice lodged behind my ribs. I told her I wanted to know the truth, why they did not come, why they declined the calls. Ruth held my gaze and did not look away. "Because showing up is work," she said, "and they only do the kind that pays them in attention." The sentence landed with the weight of something I had always suspected but never permitted myself to name. She did not press it further. She let it sit, and in that quiet, I realized I was breathing more easily. A respiratory therapist stopped by to adjust my oxygen and check my saturation, and Ruth stepped back without leaving a respectful orbit that made room for care while staying inside the circle of it. When the therapist left, Ruth asked if I had eaten anything. I shook my head. She disappeared for 5 minutes and returned with a small cup of applesauce and a sealed bottle of water from the nurse station, then waited while I took slow spoonfuls like I was relearning how to receive. Between bites, she told me where she had been when the call came at a neighborhood tax clinic where she volunteers during filing season, reviewing returns for retirees who do not trust software and do not want to be tricked by fine print. She said it without bragging. She never bragged. She just built sturdy things around people and left before anyone could turn gratitude into debt. When I finished the applesauce, she wiped my fingers with a small napkin, the kind of simple kindness that broke something stubborn in me. "You are safe, Lauren," she said again. But this time, the word did not feel like a script. It felt like a fact. I asked her to tell me what would happen next. Not the medical details, but the life ones, the things that kept my pulse skittering whenever I thought about my apartment, my job, the messages piling up on my phone. Ruth opened her notebook and clicked a pen. "First, you rest. Second, I will call your HR and notify them formally that you are on medical leave with documentation. Third, I will put my number on all your intake forms so they stop calling people who cannot be bothered to answer. Fourth, I will bring you your charger and a clean shirt and whatever else you want from your place. Fifth, we make a plan for everything else when you are ready." Her voice did not tremble on the word plan. Mine almost did. She asked for my apartment keys, and I slid them from the side pocket of my bag where the nurse had tucked my things. Ruth put them in her purse like she was putting something precious into a vault. She glanced at my phone resting dark on the tray. "Do you want me to turn off notifications?" I nodded. She did it quickly, then set the phone face down as if to shield me from a storm I did not have to endure while hooked to a monitor. The nurse returned with an update from the attending physician and asked if there was family she should call for consent if anything changed overnight. Ruth answered before I could swallow the shame. "You can call me," she said, sliding over her card stamped with her name and a number that has never changed. "I will be here or I will be reachable." The nurse glanced at me for confirmation, and I nodded, a thread of relief winding through my chest. After the nurse left, Ruth pulled her chair closer and told me a story I had not heard since I was a child, about the summer my mother and she worked double shifts at a diner to save up for their first apartment. How my mother could carry 3 plates in one hand and Ruth could calculate every tip to the penny, and how they promised each other they would never let anyone make them small. Somewhere along the way, Ruth said your mother forgot what that promise means. I have not. The sentence did not accuse. It mourned. We sat with that for a while, the beeping steady, the curtains stirring with every draft. When a volunteer offered warm blankets, Ruth tucked one around my shoulders herself, her hands precise and unhurried. Then she leaned in close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the kind that come from a lifetime of looking straight at the hard things. Tomorrow we take stock, she said in a tone that belonged to both an aunt and an auditor. Not to punish, to protect. Not because you owe anyone proof, because you deserve to know where your life is bleeding. The word bleeding made my chest tighten, but not from fear, from recognition. I asked if she would really come back in the morning. She smiled with half her mouth the way she always had when I was little and asked whether rain would cancel our picnic. I am not leaving Lauren. Not until you can stand in your life without shaking. I closed my eyes then, not to escape, but to rest inside the fact of her presence, the rare calm of being covered by someone who meant it. When I opened them again, the room looked the same, but felt different, as if someone had repaired a seam I did not know was torn. Ruth sat beside me, one hand on the rail, her notebook open to a clean page, ready to write down whatever truth tomorrow demanded. Morning arrived as a pale wash of light behind the curtain, and with it Ruth carrying a tote bag, a thermos that smelled like real coffee, and the same careful energy she had the night before, steady and precise. She set the bag on the chair, greeted the nurse with a small nod, then pulled my laptop and a thin envelope from inside the tote, as if she were laying out instruments before a delicate procedure. Ready to take stock, she said, and the way she said ready made something inside me sit up straighter. I gave her my passwords without hesitating, a trust that felt natural with her in a way it never had with anyone else. Ruth logged into my primary bank account, eyes scanning the dashboard with the practiced focus of someone who had audited ledgers longer than I had been alive. She clicked through statements month by month, highlighting with her finger as she spoke softly so I could follow without feeling overwhelmed. Automatic transfer to Henry Mitchell, same amount, same day, every month. Automatic transfer to Carol Mitchell, separate amount, different day. 2 payments marked as family contribution to mortgage routed to an account that is not in your name. She opened the memo field on the transfers and read my old notes aloud, phrases that now sounded like confessions. Just until they stabilize. Temporary help. We will reassess in spring. She did not scold me. She simply wrote down the totals on a yellow pad line after line, then moved to a second tab and opened my credit card account. There it was clear and insulting in its simplicity. Recurring charges labeled studio lease fee and content equipment rental that matched the dates of Maddie's posts about expanding her brand. Ruth clicked into card settings and found the authorized user list. Maddie Mitchell active. She looked up at me. Did you add her? I nodded, shame creeping up my throat. She said her credit was new and needed to build history. I thought it was temporary. Ruth did not sigh. She did not roll her eyes. She simply said, temporary is the word people use when they want your yes to last forever. She removed Maddie as an authorized user with 2 clicks, then flagged the charges for documentation. Next, she opened a familiar set of charges from streaming services and delivery apps and utilities that should have been mine alone but reflected usage patterns from 2 different addresses. Ruth cross-checked them against emails on my phone. Noah using my Netflix and my Amazon, hardly surprising, but also my electricity account in his apartment, set to paperless statements sent to an email he created with my name in it. She opened my email and searched for utilities to confirm. There, it was a welcome message from the provider months ago that I had never seen likely buried under work notifications. Ruth took a photo of the screen for records and said in a voice that could cut glass without raising the volume, identity misuse tied to financial liability. We will handle it. She moved to my payment apps, the ones that always made my stomach knot. Row after row of transfers to Noah labeled only rent shortfall or I will pay you Friday or emergency. Transfers to Maddie labeled as loan sponsor shoot deposit for retreat. Transfers to my parents labeled as groceries insurance gap one-time help for property tax. Ruth totaled the numbers calmly and wrote them on the pad. Then she opened the savings account and breathed in slowly when she saw the balance. Lower than it should be for a woman who worked the hours you work. She glanced at me not with judgment, but with grief. They have been bleeding you dry in polite amounts, just enough to keep you functioning, not enough to let you notice the total cost. She slid the laptop slightly and opened another browser tab to my mortgage portal, except there was no mortgage in my name. The mortgage was theirs yet twice a month. My account sent payments to a third-party service that forwarded funds to their bank. In their messages, they called it our shared home, our family asset, our future. But the deed did not list me anywhere. Ruth pulled the envelope from her tote and fed out a crisp printout she had obtained over breakfast from the county records site. Deed shows owners as Henry and Carol only. No trust, no addendum. She tapped the paper with her pen. You are paying for an asset you cannot claim and from which you can be legally excluded. That is not support. That is extraction. I felt heat crawl under my skin, a humiliation that carried both anger and relief. Anger that I had let it go on so long. Relief that someone was finally naming it in plain language. Ruth kept going methodical and relentless in the way kindness sometimes needs to be. She checked my health insurance portal and found an unpaid balance routed to my personal account because of out-of-network charges for Carol's recent clinic visit. A visit I had not even known about somehow tagged to my plan through a prior dependent authorization that should have expired years ago. Ruth documented the entry, then called the number on the back of my card and spoke to a representative with polite firmness that brooked no confusion. She asked for the authorization history, requested a retroactive audit, then arranged for written confirmation that my plan covered me alone. She handed me the phone only when consent required my voice, then took it back and closed the loop. After an hour of careful sorting, she set down the pen and looked at the yellow pad where she had drawn a simple map of my life in numbers. Incoming salary normal, outgoing wildly abnormal, household support sent to parents recurring, business expenses paid for sibling recurring, housing and utilities subsidized for brother recurring, miscellaneous constant. She drew a clean line across the totals and placed the pen on top as if sealing a letter. Lauren, she said, and her voice was soft and unshakable. This is not generosity. This is financial abuse. The words landed like a gavel, not because I had never considered them, but because hearing them spoken by someone who had seen thousands of ledgers and learned to recognize patterns of harm made the truth irrefutable. She did not stop at naming it. She opened my bank settings and turned off every automatic transfer, then set alerts for any transaction over a number we agreed on. She removed saved payment methods from apps that Noah used and changed passwords while I watched dictating each new phrase so I would remember them later. She set up two-factor authentication, routed to her number temporarily while mine remained on the hospital intake forms. She exported the last 2 years of statements to a folder on the desktop and labeled it with today's date, then copied it to a small flash drive she carried and slid it back into the envelope. When she finished, she turned the laptop toward me. Do you want to see the totals, or would you rather I hold them for now? I swallowed and nodded. Show me. She pointed to the final figure, and the number was so large my breath stuttered. It was the cost of a down payment, the cost of a degree, the cost of a different life. I closed my eyes and let the reality move through me like a wave that knocked me down and then receded, leaving me raw and clean on the sand. Ruth did not touch me in that moment. She let me feel it. When I opened my eyes, she was already on the next step, drafting a simple document that listed what had been paid to whom and under what pretenses. Paper is how you get your power back, she said. We keep records. We decide what stops today. I nodded, and for the first time, the nod felt like an action rather than an apology. Ruth handed me the pen, and I signed my name beneath a line that read, Authorization to revoke transfers. She gathered the pages, slid them into the envelope, and tucked it back into her tote. Then she looked at me with that steady accountant gaze and repeated the sentence that would become a hinge on which my life turned. This is financial abuse, and it ends now. The moment Ruth helped me shut off the last automatic transfer, something inside me loosened and tightened at the same time, like a rope finally slipping free from the pulley that had been strangling it for years, only to reveal the raw burn marks left behind. She closed my laptop with a soft click that felt louder than any confrontation I had ever imagined having with my family. That is step one, she said, her tone calm, steady, unshakable. Now we secure the perimeter. The phrase made me exhale a breath I did not realize I had been holding. She reached for my phone, next turning it over in her hands like an artifact. You and this device have been held hostage by other people's emergencies for far too long. She handed it to me. You decide when the lines close. I stared at the black screen, my reflection faint and ghost-like. My pulse fluttered strangely in my chest. I had lived so long in reaction mode that the idea of creating silence felt foreign, even dangerous, like stepping into an unfamiliar room after years of being trapped in a hallway. I powered the phone on, and the notifications came in like a hailstorm. 37 missed texts from my mother, 18 from Noah, 5 from my father, 8 from Maddie, plus dozens of unread group messages from chats I no longer wanted to belong to. Ruth waited patient and immovable while my thumb hovered over the screen. I opened the first message from Carol expecting concern, fear, maybe frantic worry. Instead, I found a single line. Henry's debit card was declined. Did you forget to transfer for the mortgage? My throat closed. No mention of the ER. No question about whether I was alive. Only the mortgage. I opened the next text. Daughter, this is irresponsible. We need stability. There was something almost comedic in the audacity, a tone that suggested I had personally disrupted the Earth's rotation. Another message arrived as I was reading. You better fix this before afternoon. Noah's messages were no better. Hey, can you cover my rent real quick? Landlord being a jerk. And then, why is the utility bill unpaid? And you promised you would help until I get back on my feet. He had been saying that for 6 years. Maddie's text bubbles were a different flavor entirely. My card declined at brunch and I looked stupid in front of everyone. Fix it. Then later, another message dripping with entitlement. I need the studio payment processed tonight. I have a live stream. Then, the pièce de résistance. Stop ignoring us, Lauren. You are acting unstable. The phone vibrated again and again, each message a tiny electric shock. I felt my chest ache not from arrhythmia this time, but from the familiar pull of guilt, a well-worn muscle memory. The part of me that had spent years trying to soften every blow for them stirred, whispering, "You should respond. You should fix this. You should keep them from falling apart." But another part of me, a part I had been too exhausted to hear until now, rose slowly like a creature waking after hibernation. A quieter voice, a firmer one. You do not owe them your life. Ruth must have sensed the battle inside me because she placed a hand on my forearm, grounding and steady. Guilt is something they trained you to feel, she said. That does not make it true. I inhaled shakily. Every instinct begged me to answer, to soothe, to absorb their panic so they would not turn it into anger later. But then I remembered the brunch photo, the caption, the empty chair, the joke tag, the group chat removal, the declined calls. I scrolled through the messages again, and with every entitled demand, the old reflex loosened. I opened my contacts and blocked Noah. Just like that. My finger hovered for a second before completing the action, and when his name disappeared from the screen, the first sliver of relief passed through me like cool air. Then I blocked Maddie. A second exhale. Then my father. Then my mother. Each block felt like cutting a thread tied to a weight I had been dragging so long it had begun to feel like an extension of my body. Ruth did not react, did not praise, did not comment. She simply sat there with me, letting the silence fill the space where their demands had lived. When the final block was complete, I set the phone face down. My hands shook. Closing the lines does not end them, I whispered. They will come harder. Ruth nodded once. People who rely on your silence always get louder when you finally speak. I leaned back against the pillow, feeling both lighter and terrified. The guilt washed over me in waves, sharp and insistent. I should text Mom that I am okay. I should tell them what the doctor said. I should apologize for the mortgage. The voices in my head sounded exactly like them. Ruth leaned forward. Lauren, guilt is not truth. Guilt is the tax good people pay before freedom. The words hit with a clarity that felt like a key turning in a lock. Freedom. It was a word I had never associated with myself. I closed my eyes, breathing slowly, feeling the shape of the day settle around me. I expected tension. I expected panic. What I did not expect was peace. A small, fragile peace, but real. When I opened my eyes again, Ruth had already shifted to the next step. Now we notify the bank that all outgoing transfers are revoked. She made the call with professional calm, giving precise dates and transaction IDs, confirming each cancellation with the representative. When the banker asked if the transfers were voluntary, Ruth said they were conditioned and coerced, a phrase that made the line go quiet for a moment. After the call, Ruth wrote 2 sentences on her pad and handed it to me. This is the beginning, not the end. And for the first time in my adult life, I believed her. I leaned back, let the room settle around me, and felt the tight grip of obligation begin to loosen, like a knot slowly coming undone. Cutting the financial cords did not solve everything. It did not erase the years I spent holding them all together, but it was the first real choice I had made entirely for myself. And as the machines hummed softly at my bedside for the first time since my collapse, I felt something I could not name without fear. Possibility. The fallout began faster than Ruth predicted, almost as if the moment I cut the financial cords, every person who had fed from them felt the shift in their bones. The first wave hit 30 minutes after I blocked their numbers, when the nurse stepped into my room holding a cordless phone with a tight expression and said, "There is a man downstairs insisting he needs to see you immediately." Something cold ran through me, even before she added, "He says he is your father." I told her to send him away, but she hesitated the way people do when they sense conflict brewing just outside the door. I repeated it more firmly this time. "Do not let him up." She nodded and left, closing the door gently behind her. A few seconds later, my phone, which was still turned face down, buzzed against the tray table with a new kind of tremor. A string of voicemails, each one popping up as an alert from an unknown number because I had blocked the originals. I picked it up slowly, my pulse sharp in my throat. The first voicemail was my father's voice, tense and brittle. "Lauren, this is serious. Call me." The second came 30 seconds later. "You cannot ignore us. The mortgage is due today. We are counting on you." The third was sharper, angrier. "Do not do this. Your mother is upset. Fix this now. Fix this now. Not are you okay? Not what happened. Not why are you in the ER. Fix this." They wanted me functional again, not healed. Useful, not safe. A fourth voicemail hit, this time my mother. Her tone so carefully laced with sweetness that it made my stomach twist. "Honey, we heard something happened at work. Why did you not tell us sooner? Your father is panicking about the mortgage again." Her emphasis on the word mortgage was unmistakable. I imagined her sitting at the kitchen counter wringing her hands for effect, not for me, but for the stability I had been forced to provide. Another voicemail. Noah, this time, his voice thick with irritation. "What did you do? My apartment manager is calling non-stop. You know I need help until I get on my feet. I covered your utilities last month. That was your responsibility. And then the kicker. You owe us." A claim so casual it almost sounded logical, except it was a lie born from habit. I played the next voicemail because some part of me still wanted one sliver of humanity. Instead, Maddie's voice hit the speaker like a slap. My card declined at brunch and everyone saw. Do you know how humiliating that was? After everything I do for you, everything she did for me, I almost laughed. Then she added, "I need the studio payment now. I have a collaboration due tonight. This is not a good look for me." For her. The way my entire life existed under the weight of her appearances, her brand, her image, never mine. My chest tightened with something that was not fear anymore. It was anger, hot and electric, rising up through every place I had gone numb. The phone buzzed again with a new string of messages from unfamiliar numbers. I recognized the cadence anyway. They had moved to texting through alternate phones. "You cannot run from this. You are acting irrational. You are making a scene. You are destroying this family. You are embarrassing us." Each accusation sharper than the last, each one a script they had used on me for years. I felt the familiar pull of guilt trying to drag me under again, but it was weaker this time, like a tide that had lost its force. Ruth watched my expression shift and reached for her notebook. "Let me guess," she said. "They are not asking if you are alive." I shook my head. "Did not think so." She wrote down times and quotes, her face calm, but the small tick in her jaw told me she was furious on my behalf. I expected the flood of messages to slow, but instead, the desperation escalated. Another voicemail arrived from my father, his voice rising with a brittle edge. "You are about to destroy everything we built. Do you understand the damage you are causing?" I replayed the sentence twice because the absurdity of it felt surreal. Everything we built. As if the weight of their lives had ever been evenly carried, as if they had built something other than expectation piled on top of obligation, stacked on top of silence. The messages kept coming faster, louder, harsher. Carol again. "Honey, please, we need to talk. You are blowing things out of proportion. This is just stress." Noah followed with a message so entitled it felt like a parody. "I have plans tonight. Do not make me look irresponsible. Fix the bill." The word fix repeated again and again across their messages like a mantra, a reminder of the only role they had ever allowed me to hold. Maddie chimed in one more time, the words almost vibrating with panic. "My brand will tank if this continues. You need to apologize." The entitlement was stunning, but what moved through me was not shock. It was clarity. Ruth leaned in beside me. "They are not panicking because you are in the hospital," she said. "They are panicking because the machine broke. The one they fed from. The one they depended on." Her words hit the center of me with perfect accuracy. My phone buzzed again with one final voicemail. My father's voice lower, colder. "If you do not fix this today, do not bother coming back to this family." The old me would have shattered under that sentence, scrambling to repair what was never mine to keep intact. The new me, or whatever version was beginning to form, felt something else entirely. Relief, because finally, unmistakably, they had told the truth out loud. Ruth sat back in her chair studying my face. "You okay?" I nodded slowly. Not okay exactly, but awake. Awake in a way I had not been in years. I turned off the phone, placed it face down again, and whispered, "Let them panic. Let them fall apart." Ruth gave a single approving nod. "The line is closed," she said. "And this time it stays closed." Outside the window, low, Seattle clouds drifted past, soft and gray. Inside the ER, for the first time since collapsing on the steel platform, I felt something steady forming in my chest. Not guilt, not fear. Resolve. And it was strong enough to dwarf every message they sent, every demand, every threat, every guilt-soaked plea. They were falling apart because I had stepped away. And maybe, finally, that was exactly what needed to happen. The first sign that Maddie had shifted from private panic to public performance came the next morning when a nurse wheeled in my breakfast tray and said casually, "I think someone who knows you is causing a scene online." My stomach tightened because I already knew who it was before she even clarified. I unlocked my phone long enough to see the flood of notifications blowing up my social media, my name appearing in places it had never been before. At the top of the feed was Maddie's username, the pastel logo she used for her wellness brand, and a bright red banner reading "Live." Against every part of my better judgment, I tapped the stream. The screen opened to Maddie sitting on her bedroom floor, soft lighting bathing her face in a glow meant to suggest vulnerability, not the ring light she had propped out of frame. She sniffled loudly, her mascara smudged just enough to look accidental, though I recognized the technique she had once practiced in the mirror for a video about emotional resilience. Her voice trembled with the perfect amount of fragility as she addressed the hundreds of viewers already flooding her chat. "Hey guys, I do not usually go live like this, but I need to talk about something serious." She drew a shaking breath, placing a hand against her chest dramatically. "Please send prayers. My family is going through something really heartbreaking." The comments poured in instantly. "What happened?" "Stay strong. Love and light." She blinked her lashes, letting another tear fall. "It has to do with my sister, Lauren. She is in a really dark place right now." I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. She continued, voice cracking in manufactured despair. "We have been trying everything to help her. We have been calling her non-stop. She just pushes us away and she will not let us in." She said pushes us away like she had spent the last decade trying to hold me up instead of emptying my accounts. Maddie wiped her eyes delicately with a sweater sleeve. "I know people only see the good moments we share, but behind the scenes we have been dealing with so much." She paused for dramatic effect. Her mental health is spiraling and we are all scared. A gasp rippled through the chat. Hundreds of comments filled the screen. Is she okay? You are such a good sister. Thank you for sharing this. I pressed my tongue to the back of my teeth until I tasted metal. Maddie continued, one hand brushing her hair behind her ear with the practiced melancholy of someone who had spent years staging her vulnerabilities. If Lauren sees this, which I hope she does because she blocks us everywhere, please know we love you. We want to support you. Please come home. Home. The word felt like a bruise. Maddie sniffled again and glanced off camera, then leaned closer to the screen. I think she is acting out of trauma. Maybe from work stress or something else. We are doing everything possible to get her help before it is too late. Before it is too late. She made it sound like I was a danger to myself instead of a threat to her lifestyle. I watched, heart pounding with a mixture of disbelief and cold recognition. This was not the first time Maddie had rewritten reality, but it was the first time she had done it in front of thousands of strangers. Then, the moment that would crack the whole performance open happened so fast I almost missed it. Maddie forgot to mute her microphone. A voice in the background whispered something. Maybe move to the crying part. You are losing viewers. Maddie's eyes flicked sideways, then she whispered back. Is this dramatic enough? The engagement is dropping. The comments exploded instantly. Did she just say that? Wait, what? Unmute Queen, we heard everything. Maddie's face froze in real panic this time, her mouth opening slightly before she slammed her finger against the screen and ended the stream abruptly. I sat up straighter in my hospital bed as the fallout began in real time. Screenshots of her whispered comment had already been captured and posted by viewers. Clips of the unmuted audio circulated on TikTok within minutes, stitched beside her earlier tearful performance. The caption on one viral post read, "Wellness influencer caught faking mental health crisis for engagement." Another read, "Not the sister pretending to care while sis is in the hospital." A third showed a split screen of Maddie's brunch story from the day I collapsed next to her live stream, crocodile tears. The internet, so quick to coddle her minutes earlier, had turned as fast as wildfire in dry brush. Comments flooded every corner of her page, calling her manipulative, predatory, heartless. Some pulled up old posts of hers bragging about family, contrasting them with her actions now. Others dug deeper, asking questions about her business expenses, her studio, her retreats. A few amateur sleuths had already found her brand partnerships and begun tagging the companies with demands for cancellation. Maddie tried to fight back, posting a story insisting the audio was taken out of context, but the damage was far beyond control. Every minute she posted, someone else exposed another piece of her hypocrisy. Meanwhile, my family group chats, which I was no longer part of, were apparently melting down. Noah left a furious voicemail from a hidden number. You are ruining everything. Do you know what people are saying about us? Mom is hysterical. Dad is furious. Fix this now. The phrase "again fix this" meant patch the holes in their comfort, not mend the truth. Ruth sat beside me quietly through the entire spectacle, watching Maddie's downfall unfold with the detached focus of someone who had seen this kind of implosion before. She finally said softly, but with steel underneath, "You did not ruin anything. You just stopped enabling the lie." The lie revealed itself. She tapped her notebook with the pen. With people like this, consequences are not cruelty. They are clarity. For the first time ever, I watched my family's narratives crumble without me rushing in to soften the blow. They could no longer hide behind curated stories or guilt-soaked pleas. Their actions were on display, stripped bare, and the world saw them exactly as they were. I set my phone down, numb and stunned, but also strangely calm. Let it burn, I thought. Let every single mask fall. Ruth glanced at me knowingly. The truth is finally doing the work for you. And she was right. For the first time in years, I did not have to defend myself. The world was doing it for me. By noon, the day of Maddie's botched live stream, the internet had done what it always does when it smells performance dressed up as compassion, and the turn was swift and merciless and strangely methodical, as if 1,000 separate hands had agreed on the same script without ever speaking to one another. The first wave came from casual viewers who clipped the unmuted whisper and paired it with her earlier tear-streaked face, then asked the question that split everything open, which was whether any of this had ever been real. The second wave came from people who had followed her long enough to remember details, and they began stitching receipts together like a quilt of contradictions. Someone dug up her brunch story from the exact morning I was admitted to the ER and placed it beside a screenshot of the hospital call log that showed the calls to my parents being declined, and the contrast made something inside me lock into place because it was the picture I had seen alone in my hospital bed made visible to the world. Another account compiled a timeline of Maddie's posts about family peace and gratitude, and overlaid the captions with comments from her fans praising her big heart, and then cut to the moment she asked off camera if the crying was dramatic enough because engagement was dropping, and the dissonance rang like a bell no one could unhear. Within an hour, the phrase "Justice for Lauren" began to appear on every platform, not as a fan chant, but as a quiet demand for decency. And brands that had once reposted her wellness affirmations began receiving a steady stream of polite but pointed questions about whether they endorsed manipulating mental health for clicks. A yoga mat company replied first, saying they were reviewing their partnership, and while they did not mention her by name, everyone understood the implication. A skincare brand suspended a planned giveaway and posted a statement about authenticity and trust. The comments beneath those posts filled with strangers who had no idea who I was, yet were furious on my behalf and on behalf of anyone who had ever been turned into a prop in someone else's redemption arc. Then, the third wave hit, which was the deep dive. Amateur sleuths pulled county records that showed the deed to my parents' house listed only their names, even though Maddie had regularly referred to it as our family home that we all contribute to. Someone found a clip from last winter where she bragged about sponsoring her little brother's fresh start, and viewers put it next to the time-stamped utility and delivery charges pulled from screenshots now circulating that showed my accounts paying for services at Noah's apartment. None of that evidence came from me. It all came from the paper trail Ruth had taught me to see, and that others now recognized once the mask shattered. Meanwhile, my phone pulsed with a new rhythm not from my family, but from coworkers and distant friends, and even people who had left my life years ago sending messages that said, "We had no idea and we are so sorry, and we are proud of you for finally protecting yourself." I read them with a strange mix of grief and gratitude. Grief for the years I had spent invisible, and gratitude for the sudden feeling of being seen by people who owed me nothing. Ruth watched me read until she saw my shoulders drop a fraction, and then we scrolled together through the fallout, neither of us celebrating, but neither of us pretending it was not a relief to watch the truth move like weather. By mid-afternoon, a larger account posted a compilation that went viral on a national level. It began with Maddie's words, "Family brunch, no drama today," and then cut to an audio of my heart monitor beeping in the background of a nurse video explaining how quickly arrhythmia can become fatal. No names, no doxing, just juxtaposition so stark it did the work of 1,000 arguments. The comment section turned from gossip to ethics. People asked what it meant to curate family while erasing the member who financed it. Therapists weighed in about financial abuse. Nurses told stories about emergency contacts who never answered. Adult children confessed that they too had become the dependable one whose collapses were treated like inconveniences. It felt like watching a private wound become a mirror for countless others, and there was both comfort and sorrow in that. By evening, Maddie tried to go live again with a new script about misunderstandings and malicious editing, but the chat would not let her perform. Where was Lauren when you filmed the brunch? Did you remove her from the family chat? Did your parents decline hospital calls? Do you benefit from her paying your bills? Why did you whisper about engagement while crying? She could not answer without pulling the thread that held her whole fabric together, so she ended the stream early and posted a text graphic about healing and second chances that sounded like it belonged to someone else's life. Brand partners continued to distance themselves. One by one, the links on her profile went dark. Noah left me another voicemail, this time quieter and meaner, accusing me of turning the internet against them as if I had time or energy for that from a hospital bed. My mother sent a message asking why I was letting strangers mock our family, and my father demanded I issue a statement clarifying that I was unstable and needed guidance. I did not reply because for the first time, my silence did not protect them. It protected me, and the world did not misinterpret that silence as guilt. It read it as a boundary. The hospital room felt different as the sun went down. The beeping steadied. The air seemed less tight. Ruth brewed coffee from the thermos she had brought and handed me a cup I was allowed to hold, though I could barely drink. She said, "This is what happens when stories align with facts. It takes time, but once the truth catches fire, it does not need gasoline." We turned off my phone for a while and listened to the hallway. Somewhere a volunteer pushed a cart of library paperbacks. Somewhere a new patient cried softly and a nurse comforted them with a voice like a lullaby. When we turned the phone back on later that night, one more video had found traction. A neighbor had posted footage from her porch camera that showed my parents returning from brunch on the day of my collapse, laughing as they sifted through mail and ignoring repeated calls from the same number. The neighbor had blurred the screen, but the cadence of the ringtone matched the hospital call log and the timing lined up with the messages the ER left. The caption did not gloat. It simply said, "Sometimes the truth is not complicated." That video sealed what had already become obvious. I felt no triumph, only a deep internal unclenching. Ruth squeezed my hand and told me to sleep because tomorrow would be loud in a different way, and we would meet it with paper and calm. I lay back and closed my eyes, and for the first time since the steel platform gave way beneath me, I believed that I would be able to live a life where my worth was not a line item in someone else's budget, and where my voice did not have to compete with a sister's ring light to be believed. Morning returned with a gray sky and the sense that the internet had burned through one forest and was already eyeing the next, but the fire I needed to face was not public at all. It was paper. Ruth arrived with her tote again and a narrow expression that meant she had already been busy. I brought something she said, laying a printout on my blanket. It was an email chain between my parents and a small law office in our county time-stamped 2 days after my collapse. The subject line read, "Urgent inquiry regarding access to daughter's benefits," and the body was worse than the title. My mother had written that I was unwell, that I could not manage my affairs, and that they needed immediate guidance to access any short-term disability, long-term disability life insurance, or employer benefits available to me. The attorney's reply was cautious and generic, full of disclaimers about capacity and documentation, but my parents had followed up within minutes, asking for the quickest path to temporary control until a court could formalize it. Ruth had highlighted a sentence that looked harmless if you read it quickly and horrifying if you let it land. "We will ensure her paychecks and any benefits are safely directed to us while she stabilizes." My stomach went cold. Ruth slid a second printout over the first. This one was from my employer's HR inbox, forwarded to her by the HR manager after Ruth had called earlier to put a protection note on my file. A voicemail transcription showed a caller identifying herself as Carol Mitchell, requesting details about my disability coverage and asking where to send claim forms. She also requested to update my emergency contact and mailing address, ostensibly for my convenience. Ruth tapped the header. "They tried to redirect your mail," she said quietly, "to their house." I imagined the envelopes I had never seen piling up on their kitchen counter, my name on every one, the seal broken by someone else's hands. Ruth did not stop there. She opened my laptop and logged into my insurer's portal, then navigated to a section I did not know existed. Recent contact. On the screen sat 2 calls from a number I recognized as my parents' landline, asking for long-term disability forms and inquiring whether a third-party representative could initiate a claim on my behalf. The notes from the agent were neat and unsentimental. Advised caller that claimant must initiate. Confirmed no authorization on file. Caller attempted to verbally authorize. Not accepted. In the next entry, the agent had added, "Caller asked whether beneficiary information on life insurance could be viewed verbally. Declined." I felt my face heat, then go numb. The word beneficiary clanged in my head like a dropped wrench. I asked Ruth not to say it again, and she nodded understanding without argument. Instead, she moved to action. "We will lock everything down," she said, her voice returning to that ledger-line steadiness I had come to trust. She called the insurer from the chair beside my bed, introduced herself, then handed the phone to me long enough for me to confirm identity, add a passphrase, and list Ruth as my temporary point of contact for documentation only. When I passed the phone back, Ruth asked the agent to place a flag on my account, noting attempted third-party access without authorization and to mail forms only to my verified address. She requested that any future calls regarding my policies be logged with date time and summary. When she hung up, she turned to the HR protection layer. She called my HR manager, the woman who had sent flowers to the ER and who sounded both relieved and furious as Ruth explained the situation. HR added a note that no changes could be made to my contact's payer benefits without a signed in-person form from me. They also confirmed that any disability claim had to originate from the employee, not the family, and that my role was classified under an e-resay plan with strict rules the attorney in my parents' email would certainly know. Ruth ended the call by scheduling a time for us to review my beneficiary designations when I was discharged. "We will set them to match your real life," she said. "People who show up, not people who send you invoices for existing." The phrase hit me hard, and I swallowed around it. Ruth was not finished. "Identity theft loves to dress as caretaking," she said softly. "We file the boring things that make noise later if anyone tries again." She opened a government site and helped me submit an identity theft report, then placed a fraud alert on my credit file, and initiated a freeze with all 3 bureaus. She suggested a police incident number, not because we expected an arrest, but because paper gravity matters when you are a woman trying to be believed. By the time the nurse came in to check my vitals again, the accounts were locked, the alerts active, the HR notes live, and the insurer had mailed me a hard letter confirming the passphrase and the flag. The nurse adjusted my IV and said with the calm of someone who has seen many families and many kinds of love, "You have good backup in your aunt." I looked at Ruth and felt something close to awe. She did not gloat. She did not perform. She just built fences in all the right places and handed me the keys. Then she opened her notebook to a fresh page and said, "Let us talk about why they moved so quickly, because it was not grief. Grief is messy and slow. This was tactical." She traced a simple flowchart on the paper as she spoke. Collapse leads to chaos, leads to a story they can tell about you being unstable, leads to a legal narrative that says they are rescuing you, leads to temporary control, leads to accounts redirected, leads to habit turning into law. It was a blueprint for how you turn a person into an asset, and it explained years of small training moments disguised as love. I thought of all the times my mother had called me fragile while asking for money, and all the times my father had praised my reliability while reminding me that family was a unit I was born to finance. I asked Ruth the question I was almost too afraid to voice. Could they have changed the life insurance beneficiary without me? Not legally, she said, but they could have tried to bluff a representative. They could have pretended to be you if no passphrase existed. They could have redirected mail and intercepted documents. They could have used urgency as leverage. It happens. She let that settle and then pressed her pen to the paper with a finality I needed. They did not succeed. You stopped it. We stopped it. I exhaled a shaky breath I had been holding since she said the word beneficiary. The betrayal should have stunned me. Instead, it clarified everything. It said out loud what their actions had whispered for years. That my value to them lived in output in dollars in what could be claimed. That love was a language they only spoke when there was a payout at the end. I thought of the brunch caption of being removed from the family chat while the ER beeped beside me of the voicemails demanding that I fix the machine they had broken. And now this. An attempt to turn my crisis into revenue. The disgust came first, hot and clean. Then the grief, heavy and old. Ruth saw both and did not try to sweep either away. She handed me a pen. "Write the sentence you want to remember when they come crying again," she said. I stared at the blank line for a long time and then wrote in careful dark letters, "Their need is not my responsibility and their story is not my truth." Ruth read it and nodded once approving. "Keep that where you can see it. We will need it for what comes next." I asked what came next, even though a part of me already knew. She closed the notebook and said, "They will go to court and try to make the story legal. Temporary conservatorship. They will call it care. We will call it what it is. And we will be ready." The papers arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, as if the weather understood how to set the scene. A courier with a neutral face handing a stiff envelope to the nurse who brought it to my room with a cautious knock and a question in her eyes. I knew what it was before I saw the heading because Ruth had predicted the move and mapped it out in her notebook like a weather chart. Petition for temporary conservatorship. Petitioners Henry and Carol Mitchell. Supporting declaration by Madison Mitchell. The air thinned in my chest as I read the language that pretended to be mercy and was actually a net. The words said I was fragile, easily confused, unable to manage bills or medication without guidance. They said my recent online behavior indicated paranoia and instability. They cited the collapse as proof of ongoing mental decline. They even included screenshots of my silence as evidence that I refused reasonable family contact, as if the absence of my replies proved I could not reply. Madison wrote the longest declaration. She described herself as a wellness advocate and caregiver who had lovingly supported me for years. She attached curated photos of us from holidays, all taken on her phone, all posted to her page, edited until every surface looked soft. She did not include the brunch story, or the hot mic live stream, or the moment she asked if her crying was dramatic enough. Noah added a short note about my tendency to overwork and isolate and about my supposed pattern of impulsive spending, which would have been hilarious if it were not so grotesque given that half his utilities bore my name. The hearing was set for the next morning on an emergency calendar. Ruth read every page twice. Her calm did not crack. "We expected this," she said. "We answer with facts." Then she opened the folder she had been building since the first night in the ER and laid our facts on the bed. A letter from the attending physician stating clearly that my collapse was a medical event caused by untreated arrhythmia and extreme exhaustion, not a psychiatric break. Vital signs stabilized. Capacity intact. A note from the charge nurse documenting the declined calls from my listed emergency contacts with times and outcomes. A statement from my plant manager affirming my reliability, my recent overtime, and the sequence of events that led to the ambulance call. An email from HR confirming my medical leave status in good standing, and that there had been attempted third-party contact regarding my benefits which HR did not authorize. A summary log from the insurer noting calls from my parents' number requesting access to disability and life insurance information and noting that authorization was denied and that a passphrase was now in place. Ruth added printouts of the internet fallout, not the jeering comments, but the simple clips that showed Maddie speaking about engagement drop while performing grief. She added the porch camera video where my parents walked into the house laughing while the hospital ringtone repeated on the counter. She added a timeline of the automatic transfers I had canceled, labeled not to punish but to show pattern. At the bottom, she placed my own declaration short and precise, written in my words that morning with the oxygen cannula still at my nose. I am capable of managing my finances and medical decisions. I have been the sole provider for my family for years under pressure and expectation that compromised my health. I have set new boundaries. I request no contact. I requested that the court deny the petition. Ruth read it aloud once, and I signed it with a steadier hand than I would have thought possible 2 days earlier. The next morning, she wheeled me to the courthouse in a hospital transport chair because the judge had permitted remote presence from a side room. The ER monitor unit loaned me a portable machine to satisfy the bailiff that I would not collapse mid-hearing. The courthouse smelled like old paper and cleaner. Ruth guided us through security with the practiced ease of someone who had shepherded many frightened clients through bureaucratic doors. We waited in a small conference room until the clerk connected us to the judge on a screen. My parents appeared from another room with their attorney, who wore the bland expression of a man who thought this would be quick. Maddie sat beside them with a sweater draped over her shoulders and no ring light, looking smaller without her curated glow. Noah leaned back in his chair with that same careless posture that had always made me feel 12. The judge began with a summary of the petition and asked my parents' counsel to present. He spoke in a concerned tone about my collapse, about my silence, about the danger of impulsive decisions after a medical incident. He said the family sought only to protect me from predatory influences and to keep my finances safe while I recovered. He said temporary oversight would avoid chaos. Then the judge asked what attempts had been made to support me without court intervention. The attorney gestured to my parents, who nodded solemnly and said they had reached out repeatedly. They had offered to take over bills they had tried to bring me home, but I was not cooperating. The judge turned to Ruth. She stood behind my chair and began with the medical letters. She read the physician note into the record. She submitted the nurse log showing the declined calls. She offered the HR email documenting attempted third-party access. She delivered the insurer log regarding long-term disability and beneficiary inquiries. She provided the porch camera video with a timestamp that matched the hospital call log, and the court admitted it for limited purpose. She then handed over a simple timeline of financial outflows from my accounts to theirs and to their adult children, and said with perfect restraint that abuse can be quiet and polite, and that capacity should not be confused with compliance. The judge read in silence for a long minute. He asked my parents' attorney if there was any evidence that I had missed rent or failed to pay a bill or neglected medication while managing my own affairs. The attorney said there were concerns about patterns. The judge repeated the question. Any evidence? He did not have any. The judge asked why my parents declined hospital calls. Their attorney tried to frame it as a misunderstanding with the devices set to Do Not Disturb. The judge asked if they returned the calls. They had not. The judge asked Maddie about the live stream. Her attorney objected that social media was irrelevant. The judge overruled, noting that credibility is always relevant. Maddie kept her eyes down and said she had been emotional and did not remember every word. Ruth did not look at her. She did not need to. She simply pushed the transcript forward and let the silence work. The judge turned to me and asked if I wished to speak. I said yes. I said my collapse came from exhaustion, created by years of carrying financial and emotional weight for 4 adults who had become accustomed to my labor. I said I was capable of managing my own life and that I had support in place from my employer, from my medical team, and from my aunt. I said I did not consent to their control, and that their rush to court came only after I revoked their access to my accounts. My voice did not shake. The judge leaned back and said the law requires evidence of incapacity or risk of immediate harm that cannot be mitigated by less restrictive means. He found neither. Petition denied. He issued an order that no one could make changes to my benefits or contacts, and that any further attempt to access my accounts without authorization would be referred to law enforcement. He suggested that if family wanted to support me, they could begin by answering hospital calls and respecting boundaries. The screen went dark. In the conference room, Ruth exhaled for the first time in an hour and squeezed my shoulder. Outside in the hallway, I heard my mother crying and my father muttering that this was unfair, and Maddie saying something about optics, and Noah saying that I had ruined everything. None of those words entered the room where we sat. The bailiff returned my ID and wished me well in a tone that sounded sincere. Ruth tucked the copies of the order into her tote. "It is done," she said. I felt lightheaded not from illness but from the sensation of a door closing on a room where I had been kept for years. For once, a system had held. For once, I did not have to be the strong one doing the holding. 3 days after the conservatorship hearing, the confrontation I had been bracing for finally came, not as a polite request or an emotional plea, but as the sudden thud of fists against my apartment door, followed by my father's voice barking my name with the impatient authority he had used my entire childhood. I had been sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, the living room dim except for the lamp Ruth had insisted I use to avoid headaches. When the knocking escalated to pounding, Ruth set down her mug and gave me a look that asked permission more than advice. I nodded. She opened the door only halfway, leaving the chain intact, and there they were. My father's face flushed with indignation, my mother's lips tight with panic. Maddie with oversized sunglasses even though the hallway was poorly lit, and Noah hulking in the back with crossed arms. They tried to push the door wider, but the chain snapped taut. My father growled, "Do not play games, Lauren. We need to talk inside," Ruth answered before I could form a word. "Conversation can happen here." My father scoffed. "This is family business. You do not belong in it." Ruth's voice stayed even. "I am here because she asked me to be." My father leaned closer to the gap in the door and said with the cold familiarity of someone asserting ownership, "You owe us a damn explanation. You embarrassed us in court. You made us look like monsters." I stood up, then legs shaky but steadier than they had been in weeks, and stepped beside Ruth. I said, "You did that on your own." My mother's eyes filled instantly as if she could cry her way through the door. "Sweetheart, you are confused. We were only trying to help. You are not well. You need guidance right now. You need structure. We were protecting you. Protecting me," I repeated, tasting the words like something rotten. "Protecting me by declining hospital calls. Protecting me by trying to access my insurance. Protecting me by filing for conservatorship. Protecting me by letting Maddie turn my collapse into content." Maddie stiffened, her jaw clenching. She said, "You do not understand the pressure I am under. My followers expect authenticity. I was trying to honor our story." Ruth let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "Honor," she said. "Interesting word choice." Noah stepped forward, then irritation giving way to anger. "Enough. You cut our accounts. You froze the transfers. You left Mom and Dad scrambling with the mortgage. You left me unable to pay rent. You cannot just do that without warning." I blinked at him. "I am not your bank." His lip curled. "You would not even have that job if it weren't for us pushing you. You owe us stability after everything we gave you." Ruth's voice cut through the air like a blade. "What exactly did you give her?" Silence. Pure, uninterrupted silence. My father finally said, "We gave her life. We gave her a home. We gave her everything she needed. That debt does not vanish because she is having a moment." Ruth said softly, "Life is not a loan with indefinite interest." My father turned red. "You shut your mouth. You have poisoned her against us. You do not understand how family works." Ruth stepped forward until her face was inches from the crack in the door. "Oh, I understand perfectly," she said. "Family to you means taking until someone breaks." Lauren simply stopped breaking. The words hung there dense and electric. My mother burst into tears, then covering her face, shaking as she whispered, "How could you do this to us? After everything, after all we planned." At that word, my entire spine went cold. "Planned." I said, "What exactly did you plan?" My mother froze, realizing too late she had said something that opened a door she could no longer close. My father muttered, "Nothing. She meant nothing. You know how she talks." But I did know. And Ruth knew. And the tension in the hallway thickened until Maddie snapped. "Fine. You want the truth. The truth is, the collapse scared us because it proved you cannot handle your life. We were trying to create a safety net, a structure where we could help make decisions if things got worse. You are overworked, unstable, and frankly unreliable right now. We were stepping up." "Stepping up," I repeated, "by filing for control of my money, by contacting my insurer, by trying to redirect my mail, by lying in court, by going live and pretending I was spiraling." Maddie's voice sharpened. "You were spiraling. Look at you. Alone. Sick. Needing strangers to speak for you. You should be grateful we tried to carry the weight." Noah added, "Yeah, grateful. Instead, you humiliated us in front of a judge." My father added, "You destroyed your mother. She has not eaten in days, and you will be responsible if she ends up in the hospital." I stared at them through the narrow gap, feeling something inside me shift like the final click of a lock. Then Ruth pulled out her phone and tapped it, bringing up a small stack of printed emails she had tucked behind the door. She lifted the one from the attorney regarding access to my benefits and read the subject line, slowly letting each word cut through the hallway. "Urgent inquiry regarding access to daughter's benefits." She held their gaze. "You were not creating a safety net. You were trying to secure a revenue stream." My father stammered. "That is taken out of context." Ruth raised an eyebrow. "The part where you asked about disability payouts. Or the part where you asked about life insurance beneficiaries." My mother gasped. Carol Ruth said, using my mother's first name with deliberate clarity, "You were setting up a financial plan for Lauren's illness before anyone confirmed she would have one. That is not care. That is preparation for profit." My father shouted, You cannot prove any malicious intent. You have no right to accuse us, Ruth replied. I do not need intent. I have evidence. And so does the court now. I felt the moment hit them all at once, the moment they realized the darkness they thought they had hidden was now illuminated, documented, undeniable. My father's posture deflated. My mother's tears stopped mid-breath. Maddie's mouth tightened. Noah's eyes darted away. They had been exposed not by my anger, but by their own paperwork. My mother whispered barely audible, "We were scared. That was all. We were scared of losing you." I said, "You did lose me. And you are the ones who walked away first. When the ER called. When I needed you. When I was barely alive. You removed me from the chat and went to brunch. And no matter how you rewrite the story, that is the chapter that will never change." Ruth unlatched the chain, then not to let them in, but to make it clear they were done. "Please leave," she said. "Lauren needs rest. What she does not need is emotional trespassers." My father opened his mouth again, but my mother touched his arm. "Let's go," she whispered. They backed away slowly, as if leaving a crime scene they had hoped would look like a misunderstanding. When the door closed, Ruth locked all 3 deadbolts and turned to me. "They showed who they are," she said. "You showed who you are not." I exhaled a breath that felt like an entire decade leaving my body. The truth had finally been dragged from their shadows into the light, where it could no longer be rearranged. And for the first time, I felt the ground beneath me steady. The strange thing about public karma is that it rarely arrives like thunder. It comes in small fractures first, hairline cracks in the image someone has spent years polishing until the whole structure collapses under the weight of its own lies. And that is exactly what happened to my family in the weeks after the confrontation at my apartment door. It began with Maddie's partnerships quietly disappearing one by one. At first, she framed it as a rebranding pause, posting vague graphics about reflecting and resetting, but the internet had already moved past subtlety. Every brand tagged beneath her old posts received comments demanding accountability. Screenshots of her hot mic live stream continued circulating, stitched beside lines from her conservatorship declaration, claiming she had always supported me with empathy. The hypocrisy was undeniable, and once the larger commentary accounts picked it up, the tone changed from amusement to condemnation. A wellness influencer faking a mental health crisis to boost engagement was not a story the internet forgave. Within days, 3 major sponsors released short statements about values alignment and terminated their contracts with her. Someone dug up the LLC filings for her wellness studio and found unpaid taxes and overdue permits. A reporter contacted her for comment. She tried to spin it, but every sentence she posted sounded like another script, another performance, another version of herself that existed only on camera. Her brand's online store closed temporarily due to unresolved billing issues. Comments poured in saying it should stay closed permanently. Noah's downfall came differently. Someone who recognized him from Maddie's live streams posted a thread about identity theft red flags and asked why an unemployed adult man had credit card charges linked to a sister he claimed was irresponsible. The thread exploded. A few amateur investigators pulled up court records and discovered a prior arrest for disorderly conduct he had never mentioned. Then they found an outstanding traffic fine he had ignored. His landlord posted in a community forum about a tenant whose rent check had bounced. People connected the dots. The landlord received screenshots of Noah's comments attacking me online, which he had posted under an account that was anything but anonymous. Within a week, the landlord issued a notice to vacate. Noah tried to blame me, leaving voicemails saying I had destroyed his life, but there was nothing left for me to absorb. His collapse was one he had built himself brick by brick. And then came the foreclosure notice for my parents' house. That one hit harder, even though I had predicted it. When I stopped paying the mortgage, the bank's patience evaporated. They sent letters. They called. They followed their procedure. My parents ignored all of it. They blamed me instead of budgeting. They blamed me instead of downsizing. They blamed me instead of telling the truth. A neighbor later forwarded me a photo of the posted notice taped to the front door, rain streaking down the edges. It did not bring me joy, but it did bring me clarity. They had wanted control over my finances, but had never once demonstrated responsibility with their own. The internet picked up their story after someone recognized their names from Maddie's meltdown. Soon, a narrative formed around the family that demanded a grown daughter rescue them financially while ignoring her medical collapse. It was not a flattering narrative, and it was not inaccurate. Then, inevitably, the police became involved. When Ruth helped me file the identity theft incident number, she predicted it would sit quietly unless someone attempted another unauthorized charge. She was right. Noah used my old card number weeks later out of habit or entitlement, attempting to purchase electronics online. The fraud block triggered an alert, and because there was already an active report, the police contacted me. I confirmed the charge was unauthorized. They contacted him next. Noah was detained overnight for questioning regarding attempted identity fraud. When he called my phone collect, I declined, just like they had declined the ER calls, not out of vengeance, but because there was nothing left to say. Meanwhile, my parents attempted damage control by launching a pity campaign on Facebook. My mother posted photos of herself crying, claiming I had been manipulated by outsiders. My father wrote long paragraphs about family loyalty and sacrifice. But commenters were not buying it. People asked about the conservatorship petition. People asked why they declined hospital calls. People asked why their daughter's collapse was treated like an inconvenience. Someone took a screenshot of Maddie removing me from the family group chat on the day I was in the ER and posted it under their thread. A retired nurse commented, "As an ER nurse for 25 years, I have never seen parents reject a hospital call for their child. Not once." The comment received thousands of likes. My parents stopped posting within a week. When a local news station reached out for a comment regarding the influencer fallout, they declined. For the first time in my life, my family went silent, not to punish me, but because they could no longer control the narrative. Meanwhile, I was getting stronger. My heart rhythm stabilized, my breathing improved. My doctor cleared me for part-time remote work. The plant manager called and said the job would be waiting whenever I was ready, but there was no rush. I watched his voicemail twice because no one had ever told me not to rush before. Ruth brought me homemade soup every evening. She helped me set up alerts on my accounts. She showed me how to read a credit report line by line. She also took me on walks through quiet neighborhoods where the air smelled like cedar and fireplaces instead of factory exhaust. One evening as we walked, she said, "Karma is not magic. It is delayed accounting. And you, Lauren, finally stopped subsidizing debt that was never yours." The simplicity of the sentence broke something open in my chest. I stopped walking. I let the air fill my lungs. And for the first time since childhood, I did not feel guilty for someone else's consequences. The next morning, I woke to another message from the bank confirming the foreclosure process had begun. My parents would have to vacate in 60 days. Another message showed Maddie's social media page locked due to repeated violations. Noah's landlord had completed the eviction. They were all falling not because I pushed, but because the scaffolding they had built from my labor had been removed. A structure built on theft and entitlement cannot stand without the person holding it up. Ruth looked at the notifications with me and said softly, "You did not destroy them. You stopped carrying them. Everything after that was gravity. And for the first time in my life, I believed it." I left Seattle on a Tuesday that smelled like rain, the kind of rain that cleans rather than drowns, with 2 suitcases, a small box of photographs, and the certainty that going was not a failure, but a decision I had earned. Ruth drove us east before sunrise, the city lights shrinking in the rear view until they looked like a constellation I no longer needed to navigate by. The highway opened and the landscape changed from steel and glass to long stretches of field and pine, and each mile put a little more space between me and the life I had carried like a body on my back. I had given notice at the plant with my doctor's letter attached, not a resignation, not a dramatic goodbye, but a clean request for an extended leave while I rebuilt the engine inside my chest. The plant manager called to say he respected the choice and would sign any paperwork I needed. It still surprised me how much kindness existed once I stopped spending all my energy cushioning people who refused to stand on their own. Ruth's house in Spokane was small and square and smelled like lemon oil and books. She had cleared a room for me with a simple bed, a desk facing a window, and a chair that looked like it had belonged to a woman who made good decisions. On the first night, she handed me a spare key and said, "This is not a stay. This is a pause. Take all the time you need." I slept hard for 12 hours and woke to quiet. Not the thin quiet of waiting for the next demand, but the thick quiet of a life with no one tugging at it. The days formed a gentle rhythm. Morning coffee on the back steps while the neighborhood stretched awake. A short walk to get my heart used to the ordinary again. Calls with a cardiac nurse who tracked my metrics and cheered at small improvements. Paperwork cleaned and stacked in labeled folders Ruth taught me to make. I took a part-time contract reviewing safety protocols for a local recycling plant work that used my brain without stealing my body, and when I logged off each afternoon, I felt tired in a way that meant effort, not erasure. We cooked simple dinners and ate them at the table like people who were not in a hurry to get back to saving the world. I thought about therapy, and then I went twice a week at first, then once holding a mug of weak tea, while a woman with a calm voice helped me understand that the ache in my chest was not just an organ relearning its job, but a person relearning hers. We talked about boundaries as acts of love for myself, not punishments for others. We talked about the difference between loyalty and self-abandonment. She asked what I wanted for the first time in a long time, and I did not know how to answer. So she asked smaller questions. What time do you like to wake up when no one needs you? What does your body feel like after a 20-minute walk? What music makes your shoulders unclench? The answers were quiet but real, and with each session my life began to take the shape of someone I recognized. The messages from my family did not stop entirely, but they slowed and changed tone. At first, there were threats and accusations from new numbers that I blocked as quickly as they arrived. Then came pleas layered in nostalgia. Remember the lake trips. Remember Christmas. We miss you. The kind of memories that burn bright because they leave out the parts that broke you. I did not reply. Then a letter arrived from my mother in careful handwriting. No return address, 3 pages of apologies that were really explanations, the kind that suggest regret without responsibility. I read it once and placed it in a folder labeled "Not Mine to Fix." My father sent a shorter note with a single line. "Family is forever." I wrote my own single line on the back and mailed it to the address on the foreclosure notice. "Respect is too." After that, the mailbox stayed quiet. Maddie tried to stage a redemption arc with a post about accountability and growth. It did not land. Noah posted a video from a friend's couch blaming cancel culture for his eviction. It did not land either. Gravity continued its work with or without my participation. I began to notice small mercies. The first morning I woke without a headache. The second week my chest stopped clenching on the stairs. The afternoon when rain hit the porch and I let myself feel content instead of guilty. The night Ruth and I watched a movie and I did not check my phone once. I printed the conservatorship denial and pinned it inside a folder, not to keep score, but to remind myself that a system can sometimes see the truth. On the first clear Saturday of spring, we drove to a trail outside town where the pines held the light like a secret. I walked slowly with my hand on the strap of my backpack and felt my heart settle into a pace that made sense. At the top of a small ridge, Ruth handed me a thermos and said, "Peace costs everything. You paid. Now enjoy it." The words did not make me cry. They made me laugh, the surprised kind of laugh that happens when you realize the weight has lifted and you are still standing. I told her I had been thinking about buying a small place someday. Nothing grand, just a clean room with a door that locked and windows that opened. She said she knew a realtor who would treat me like a person, not a problem. We made a list on a napkin. In-unit laundry, a kitchen with light, a safe street, a mortgage with only my name on it. It felt both radical and practical. I started a savings plan the next day, automatic transfers that went to future Lauren instead of everyone else. I kept therapy. I kept walks. I kept coffee on the back steps. I kept the boundary that turned my life from an emergency room into a home. Sometimes at night, stories from the wider internet reached me, strangers writing about their own families, their own collapses, their own brave exits. I read them and understood that my story was not unique, and that was the point. I had become the person who could say out loud what I once could not even whisper. I do not need to be needed to deserve air. The day the bank set the auction date for my parents' house, a cousin texted to ask if I was really letting this happen. I stared at the words for a long time and then replied with the cleanest truth I own. I am not letting anything happen. I am letting go. A week later, I drove to a bookstore alone and left with a stack of paperbacks and a pair of soft socks I did not need but wanted. I baked bread badly and then better. I called the plant manager to thank him for the time and told him I would not be back in the same capacity. He said he was not surprised and wished me well. I walked past a mirror one evening and stopped because the woman looking back did not seem like a stranger. She looked like a person who knew the price of things. She looked like a person who would not mortgage herself to buy anyone else a version of love she could not afford. When the sun set that night, I wrote a single sentence on a page and taped it to the inside of my closet door where only I would see it. Leaving is not abandonment when staying requires the abandonment of yourself. I read it every morning. I slept. I woke. I lived. And for the first time, it felt like mine. A year is not a miracle, but it is enough time for a heart to remember its rhythm and for a life to find its right size, and by the time spring circled back around, I could feel both the steadiness in my chest and the quiet in my days like paired metronomes keeping time. In Ruth's small kitchen, the morning light came through the east window and made the steam from our coffee curl like handwriting. The foreclosure had long since finished, and the house where I learned how to disappear belonged to the bank now. Maddie's pages were still up, but smaller, flatter stripped of partnerships and slogans, a digital scrapbook of someone trying to be believed without ever learning how to tell the truth. Noah had moved twice and then stopped broadcasting his location. My parents lived with a relative 2 counties away. Sometimes people forwarded me their latest explanations, their latest versions of what happened narratives, where I starred as the ungrateful daughter who fell under a bad influence. I did not correct them. Correction is a kind of caretaking, and caretaking was a costume I no longer wore. I woke at a time that belonged to me. I walked before the neighborhood filled with cars. I worked part-time on projects that had clear edges and fair pay. I stacked money in an account with my name and no add-ons, a simple trick that felt like planting a tree. I learned the taste of choices made without fear. I learned that peace is not dramatic. It is a chair that fits your back and a door you lock because you can. On Sundays, Ruth and I ate pancakes with strawberries, and she told me stories about her first job in a counting room where the air smelled like ink, and she realized numbers could be a kind of shelter. She never once told me that my family loved me in their way. She did not try to smudge the edges of harm with sentiment. She taught me that love without respect is hunger with a mask. I kept therapy. I kept my notebook of sentences that saved me on the days my old training tried to return lines like, "Your emergency is not my assignment, and silence can be a boundary, and not a wound." I kept the sentence that had become my spine. Choosing peace is not betrayal. It is survival. In early summer, I signed a modest lease on a bright apartment with creaky floors and a small balcony just wide enough for a chair and a basil plant. The first night I slept there, I woke at 2 with the old panic in my throat and walked the rooms with my palms open until the walls remembered me. I made a rule that the only mail with my name on it that crossed the threshold would be mine. I bought 2 plates, 2 bowls, 2 mugs, not because I was lonely, but because I was done building a kitchen for a crowd that only arrived to take. I called my plant manager and told him I was ready for work 3 days a week on a new safety initiative that aimed to keep trainees from burning out the way I had. He said yes and meant it. The first time I walked back into the plant, the heat still roared, but I understood it differently. Danger named is danger managed. The same was true of people. I taught the new hires to read the gauges on their bodies as carefully as the gauges on the valves. If your heart is shouting, listen. If your vision narrows, stop. Leave the floor if you must. Returning is not failure. It is intelligence. Some afternoons I sat on my balcony and watched the sky shift and did nothing else, and it did not feel like waste. It felt like proof that I had stepped out of a life where my value was measured by how quickly I could respond to other people's alarms. I wrote letters I did not send. I wrote one to the woman I used to be, the one who believed love could be purchased with sacrifice. I told her she had done enough. I told her to hand her keys to Ruth and lie down. I wrote one to the judge who said capacity is not compliance, and thanked him for speaking a sentence that fit inside my rib cage like a beam. I wrote one to my parents that began with I wish and ended with I will not. I kept them in a drawer with the conservatorship denial, and the porch camera still image, and the hospital bracelet that had once felt like a shackle and now felt like a relic from a battle I survived. I did not keep score, but I kept record. There is a difference. Sometimes people ask how to forgive what does not apologize. I tell them forgiveness is not access. I tell them repairing does not require returning. I tell them you can lay down the weight without picking up the phone. On the anniversary of the collapse, I visited the trail where the pines hold the light and brought a small thermos. Ruth walked beside me and we moved at a pace that made conversation optional. At the ridge, I poured coffee and held the cup in both hands because the warmth steadied me. I said, I do not think I want revenge. Not really. I think I wanted a witness. Ruth nodded. That is what courts try to be on their best days and what families should be every day. We stood there until the wind turned, and then we went home. That night, I cooked pasta with lemon and peas and ate it at the table with the window open. The city hummed in the soft way cities hum when the workday is over and the ordinary grace of being alive presses in from all sides. I felt gratitude that did not require me to pretend. The phone stayed quiet. I let it. When I finally laid down, the room felt like a place where no one would ask me to shrink. I slept without dreaming. Morning came. I brewed coffee. I watered the basil, which had gone from a few nervous leaves to something that looked like a small flag. I wrote a new sentence on a card and taped it inside the closet where I could see it when I chose my shoes. Freedom is not a destination. It is a daily act. I walked to work and later I walked back, and in between, I kept my promises to myself. At dusk, I sat again on the balcony and heard the faint clatter of dishes from a neighbor's kitchen and laughed at nothing in particular. I imagined the woman who will live here after me and hoped she would inherit a space already warmed by someone who learned how to stop apologizing for taking up room. I turned off the lamp. I watched the dark without fear. I chose the quiet again and knew that choosing it tomorrow would be mine to do. If you are reading this as someone who is bone-tired from holding up a house that collapses the moment you rest, I hope you hear me clearly. You are not selfish for stepping away from a table where you are always the meal. You are not cruel for letting adults meet the gravity of their own choices. You are not broken for wanting a life that does not require you to bleed. Walk out if you must. Walk slow if you must. Carry your records and your breath. Ask for help from the people who show up without invoices. Sit down when you are done. Then stand when you are ready. You will know the difference. And on a morning you cannot predict yet, you will pour coffee in a kitchen that smells like nothing but home, and you will understand what I finally did. Choosing peace is not betrayal. It is survival. And survival lived long enough becomes something softer. It becomes freedom. If you made it here breathing a little deeper than when you started, I want to ask you for something simple and important. Tell me where you are watching from and what time it is right now, because I want to remember that on the other side of this screen is a real person in a real place, choosing their own peace step by step. If any part of Lauren's story echoed inside your ribs, if you have ever stared at a phone buzzing with demands and felt your chest tighten, if you have ever paid the cost for everyone else's comfort and called it love because you did not have another word for it, I hope you will share a piece of your story in the comments. It does not have to be long. It does not have to be perfect. It just has to be true. Maybe you walked out of a room that would not let you breathe. Maybe you are still sitting at the table counting the minutes until you can stand. Maybe you are the friend who showed up like Ruth with a notebook and a steady voice when someone you love was too tired to fight alone. Tell us what happened next. Tell us what you wish someone had told you sooner. And if you are carrying something heavy tonight, use this space to set down one sentence. Your emergency is not your identity. Your worth is not a function of how quickly you answer someone else's alarm. Your silence can be a boundary and not a wound. I also want to hear from the quiet heroes who never made a post about it. The nurse who called back even when no one answered. The coworker who noticed the dizziness and stayed. The judge who remembered that capacity is not the same as compliance. The neighbor who kept a record because the truth deserved a witness. If you are over 50 and you have seen life teach these lessons the hard way, your voice matters here. Your stories carry maps the rest of us need. Tell us what you did to rebuild. Tell us what you protect now that you wish you had protected earlier. And if you are younger and just learning that peace sometimes looks like a locked door and a plate for one, tell us the first boundary you set that made your lungs work again. Before you go, if this story helped you take even a small step toward your own freedom, tap the like button so the next tired person finds it when they need it most. If you want more stories where the truth is allowed to stand without apology, subscribe and stay with us. We tell hard things with soft hands here. We do receipts and grace. We do consequences without cruelty. We do endings that are not about revenge so much as repair. And if you need words to carry into tomorrow, take these and keep them where you will see them. Choosing peace is not betrayal, it is survival. Survival lived long enough becomes something softer. It becomes freedom. Now it is your turn. Where are you watching from? What time is it where you are? What would you have done in Lauren's place? What will you do in your own?